All right, so everybody, we have what I think is the last talk from Ben this semester.
Yes!
So give it up for the two Bens that opened for Ben, and now we have headliner Ben with Palindromes.
Great, thank you. So this is the fun talk of the day, which will lead up to Massey giving an actual research talk. But I'm going to talk about some questions on palindromes, in particular some algorithmic questions, and see what comes out of that. So at a high level, what I'm going to do is first define what palindromes are, and also define an algorithms problem about them, so we have a CSE flavor. There'll be an obvious brute force way to solve that problem, and then we'll give some improvements on it, and finally conclude somewhere. So before I get started, my obligatory pun, I want us to give a hand to Andrew and Massey and David Ekman for setting up these colloquiums. Cool, that's my crappy fun. Now into the actual talk. So a palindrome is really simple. If we have some string S, it's a palindrome if the first character is the same as the last one, the second character is the same as the second to last one, and so on. So like the simple examples are Bob and Anna. So they're the same if you read them forward or backwards. There's something weird that happens with even and oddness. Because Bob is odd length, but the middle character only happens once. And Anna being even length, you do the middle character twice, but that's a small kind of thing. Then potentially the best palindrome of all time, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama, which sadly was not thought of when they made the Panama Canal. I thought that was actually the motivation to make it, but apparently that came in 1950 when someone was writing a book on palindromes. So these are worthless like my talking. But what we're going to answer today, something of value. I care about the algorithmic problem of finding the longest sub-palindrome in a string. So I give you one of Shakespeare's plays, and you need to find the largest palindrome somewhere in there of consecutive characters. If we have n characters given to us, I'm going to talk about 3 different algorithms. We have an n cubed, an n squared, or an O of n one time. Go. So the best algorithms, I'll warn you in advance, get really complicated. So we're not actually going to cover the best algorithm in any detail. And the reason is because there's a lot of complexity that comes up when people give you nonsense as your input to the algorithm. If you have something like this ABA, that's like a palindrome within a palindrome. And so if you were greedily reading through this, you might get to the end of the first ABA and think of palindrome length 3 and start looking for something else. And then you miss the big picture that ABA was actually the first half of a palindrome. And your algorithm might never pick up on that bigger picture. So it's hard to think how you just pass through the data once and somehow find the biggest palindrome. The code there is unrelated to palindromes. That's just to make it look complicated. But complicated things happen, and the best algorithms don't have a simple heuristic to them. So what we can do, the simplest idea is to do a brute force kind of idea. So we have from I to J. We want to know if that's a palindrome. So we just try all the I and J. And for each one, we want to look at all the characters. That isn't hard to check. So that total would take n cubed time to do like a very brute force idea. But that really is pretty terrible. And that is going to suck on any input you give it. If I gave you one of Shakespeare's plays, it takes forever. But to do something better, we can use this idea of centering. So instead of brute forcing through everything and looking for all the IJ pairs, what we could just do is say, well, every palindrome has a middle somewhere. And so I'm going to take each possible middle and just expand outward to see how big of a palindrome we can build. And it says I or I plus a half because there's something that happens with even and odd. But specifically, the way this idea would play out is for each middle point I, we say, well, is this the middle of an odd length palindrome? Well, a single character is always a palindrome. So then we make this M1 bigger. So we add a character on at the start and the end. And we check, is that a palindrome? That's really easy to check. Did I add on characters of the same length? Or of the same character on the front and back? And then I just keep expanding out. And that'll give me larger and larger odd length palindromes until I fail. And then I can do the same thing to look for even length palindromes just by sticking a +1 in there. I start with a pair of characters and then keep expanding outward until I see how long of an even length palindrome could be made. And then just whatever the longest palindrome I saw was is good. because every palindrome is centered somewhere. This has to work. And then the runtime would look like n squared-ish, because we have n loops at the outside, and then I expand at most length n for each centering point. Cool. So that's halfway through the talk. I want to take a moment to reflect here. So take a moment to reflect on palindromes. Here we have this algorithm that looks like it takes n squared time. But what we'd actually expect is that it'd take linear time if I gave you one of Shakespeare's plays. Because in reality, anywhere you pick in there is not a palindrome. There is not a long palindrome in that play. And so these loops are going to do 1 or 2 iterations at most. Maybe Bob's a character somewhere and we have to expand once. But there are no palindromes in random text or any particular text. So we'd expect this was really fast if I gave you some sensible human input. So then we're only really worried about some special kind of bad case. But this looks like it might be a linear time algorithm in practice. So with that kind of thought, we're back to this slide. We talked about these first 2 methods. Took n cubed time and n squared time. The linear time algorithm I want to talk about is Manacher's algorithm. That was the first method that gave linear convergence for this palindrome problem. It's from like the 60s. But it really follows spiritually in this centering thing from that observation that, that the algorithm should be linear time on random looking data. It's only special things that would break it. So the type of structure that help us specifically is palindromes inside palindromes. That's the only way you're going to make us have to expand outward a lot, because the algorithm was only slow if at every center I had to expand a lot. So the only way I have to expand at every center is if we have palindromes on palindromes. So what you'd like to do then is to have the algorithm take some notes. If we found this palindrome of length 3 on the left before, and we found the palindrome of length 3 on the right, when I was looking at the middle part, I should be able to make some deductions. Like, well, I only have to check the first half of the characters on the left and check that they match the first half on the right. Because since I already checked they're both palindromes, I know that the remainder of them is the same as the start. So we can start making deductions when there are palindromes on palindromes. And if you take that to its extreme, which I don't want to go through all the gory details, if you do all the palindromes on palindromes logic, that's the only place the centering algorithm failed. And you can get that boosted up to having a linear runtime as well if you do these clever tricks. So the concluding statement is that given a string of like this, the longest subpalindrome can be found in O of n cubed, n squared, or O of n time. That's the main result that I was hoping to get to eventually after all this work. But now we have these 3 different methods I've sketched. I know this talk's a bit drawn out, so I want to skip past this slide. So just to conclude what we've done, we defined a problem on palindromes. I gave you a brute force way to solve it and some improvements on that. And then here I am concluding. So do you have any questions on palindromes? Any questions? David Ekman.
So would you say that tessellations here that you've used in your pictures are a kind of geometric palindrome? I haven't seen that.
Yeah, so all the pictures are MC Escher's pictures, and they're all loops. So here we've crossed back on ourselves, and so we're back at the start. And the little person here, he started right side up, but then he ended upside down. So that's the talk. You're upside down now. The whole rest of your life plays in backwards from here. Sorry about that. Then all the other pictures are things that I should give credit to Escher to, of things that are loops.
There's also like him, the portrait.
Oh yeah, so that's I guess the citation. You should recognize his face.
Did you pick this topic specifically so you could give this symmetric PowerPoint?
Yes. I have very little interest in palindromes, but it was Andrew's idea. Someone should give a talk that's a palindrome, and I spent far too much time working on how to do 13 slides of palindrome. Yeah. So the centering method is the center slide.
Yeah.
It actually, to give credit back to you though, it arose from your observation of what you called the army presentation, right?
Yeah, so the like classic military presentation is that you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. And that's how every talk should look. And so I did that, but more literally.
We don't have any other questions for Ben. I think that's as best of a note to end on as possible. One more hand for Palindrome Talk. We also clap before and after, which should be fun. Matthew, you're up.